Friends, in today's story, you will meet a young girl whose world once seemed safe behind familiar doors, until a silence too deep began to whisper truths no child should bear alone. Sometimes danger doesn't come with the hand of a stranger, but wears the face of love, the voice of someone trusted most. And when the heart cries, this isn't right, but fear begs, don't speak, who will truly listen? Be sure to watch until the end. This story might open your eyes to the voices often hidden in plain sight. If it touches your heart, please like this video. If you're new here, subscribe so you won't miss the next story that truly matters. Let's begin in the quiet town of Smokehurst, Tennessee. The shadow lay in the corner of her room, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't look away. It wasn't fear that held her gaze, but a sense of knowing. Something deeper, darker, a whisper in her chest telling her that something wasn't right. It was him, in her house, the man her mother trusted. Her heart pounded as she thought of the countless times he had been kind, always with a smile, always with warmth. But that smile was hiding something, something that felt off, something she couldn't name. She had seen it in the way his eyes lingered just a second too long, in the way his touch seemed to stretch out of time, a little too slow, a little too deliberate. She tried to tell herself it was nothing, that she was imagining things, that it was all in her head. But every time he was near, her skin crawled. She wanted to scream, but she couldn't. Not yet. What if no one believed her? What if they just brushed it off as her overreacting? The fear of being dismissed, of being wrong, clung to her like a suffocating fog. But tonight, the fear was different. Something inside her had shifted. The silence in the house was deafening, and in the stillness of the room, her heart raced with an urgency she couldn't ignore. He was standing by the door just outside her reach, and she knew that if she didn't speak now, if she didn't tell someone, it might be too late. Her pulse quickened, a tight knot forming in her throat as she took a deep breath. There was no turning back. Tonight she would find her voice. Tonight the truth would come out. Lillian sat by the window, her gaze drifting across the quiet streets of Smokehurst, a small town nestled between the hills of Tennessee. The year was 1998, and the air was thick with the warmth of an approaching summer evening. Her room, once a vibrant place filled with laughter and the soft hum of family conversations, now felt hollow. The absence of her father, who had passed away a few years ago, still lingered like an echo. She couldn't quite escape. Her mother, Sophia, tried to fill the gaps, but no matter how hard she worked or how much love she gave, it was never enough to quiet the silence that had settled over their home. Sophia worked long hours at the local library, her tired eyes betraying the exhaustion she carried from juggling two jobs. She tried to make their home feel whole again, filling it with the smell of homemade dinners and soft music, but Lillian could sense the strain. It wasn't that Sophia didn't care. It was just that life had a way of wearing people down. Sophia's laughter, though warm, never reached her eyes the way it used to, and the moments they spent together, though cherished, were fleeting, broken up by the demands of life that always seemed to come first. Lillian, at 12, had learned to navigate the quiet spaces in between. She buried herself in books, her escape from the stillness that seemed to wrap itself around her. Nature was her sanctuary. The trees outside her window, the small garden behind their house, and the soft chirping of birds in the morning brought her a fleeting sense of peace. But the stillness always returned, wrapping its fingers around her heart, reminding her of the things she couldn't name, the things that felt wrong but went unsaid. Things had changed when Sophia met Robert. He was a man who, on the surface, seemed gentle enough, kind, polite, and always eager to please. But Lillian couldn't shake the feeling that he didn't belong. He came over for dinner, bringing flowers for Sophia, telling stories that made her mother smile, but Lillian couldn't escape the feeling that something wasn't quite right. He'd look at her for a second too long, ask her questions that made her uneasy, and his touch, when it brushed against her arm, lingered just a bit too much. Lillian tried to convince herself that it was just her imagination, but the unease remained, like a shadow that refused to leave. And every time Robert left, there was a part of her that wished for the old days when it was just her and Sophia, when the silence hadn't felt so heavy. But it was clear that things were changing, and Lillian couldn't find a way to stop it. She didn't know what was wrong, only that something was missing. And no matter how hard she tried, She couldn't shake the feeling that her life was slipping into something she couldn't control. Robert, Sophia's new boyfriend, had quickly become a regular presence in their home. At first, he seemed harmless enough, kind, considerate, always with a smile. He brought flowers for Sophia, complimented her cooking, and made small talk with Lillian about school or her books. His words were always just right, filled with compliments for her drawings and quiet appreciation for the things she loved. Yet despite his charm, Lillian couldn't shake a feeling of discomfort every time he was around. She couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was. His smile never wavered, his words were always thoughtful, but there was something about the way his eyes lingered on her that unsettled her. It was subtle, hidden behind the calm, yet something about it made Lillian's stomach twist. His gaze would catch hers a moment too long, a flicker of something in his eyes that she couldn't explain. She'd quickly look away, forcing a smile of her own, but the unease never quite left. Robert began finding small excuses to speak with her. He'd ask about her favorite books, about her drawings, even about the time she spent alone in her room. He praised her talents, telling her she was exceptionally gifted, but there was always something about the way he spoke, too earnest, too soft, that made Lillian feel exposed. It was as if he could see something inside her, something she wasn't ready to share. Lillian tried to avoid his gaze when he was near, retreating to her room or busying herself with other things. She could feel his presence even when he wasn't speaking, like a shadow just at the edge of her awareness. It wasn't that he did anything overtly wrong, but the sensation of being watched, of being examined, made her skin crawl. His voice had a way of slinking into her thoughts, and it made her question herself. What was wrong with her? Why did she feel so uncomfortable? One evening, as Lillian passed by him in the hallway, Robert was standing in the doorway, as he often did, smiling as she walked past. She hadn't expected it, but as she moved by, he reached out and lightly traced his finger along her shoulder. It wasn't aggressive, just a touch, brief, almost innocent, but to Lillian it felt like an electric jolt. She froze, her body stiffening in response. The touch lingered in her mind long after, even though it didn't seem to cross any clear boundaries. It wasn't the physical act, but the way it felt, unnatural, uninvited, that made her stomach turn. For the rest of the night, Lillian couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She avoided Robert more than ever, staying locked in her room, her thoughts racing. Her instincts were screaming, but she didn't know how to voice them. She wasn't sure if it was just her imagination, but everything about him now felt like a warning she couldn't ignore. Lillian felt an unsettling shift inside her as her feelings toward Robert began to change. At first, she couldn't understand why his presence made her uneasy. He was polite, attentive, and seemed like the kind of person her mother needed in her life. Yet something inside her stirred whenever he was near, an instinct she couldn't shake. The smile that seemed so genuine on the surface now appeared thin, like a mask hiding something darker. Her mind couldn't form the exact words to explain it, but her body responded differently. Her stomach tightened, her palms would sweat when he was too close, and she found herself avoiding his gaze whenever possible. One evening, as the smell of dinner filled the house and her mother busied herself in the kitchen, Lillian was in her room, reading a book to distract herself from the tension she couldn't quite articulate. That was when she noticed him. Robert entered her room without knocking, his presence filling the doorway as he glanced around. He didn't say anything, didn't do anything outright inappropriate, but his mere presence felt like an invasion. He stood there for a moment, too long, and Lillian could feel the hairs on the back of her neck rise. It was as though he had crossed an invisible boundary, stepping into a space that was hers alone. He smiled as if nothing was wrong and made some casual remark about her books. Yet all Lillian could feel was the weight of his eyes on her, making her skin crawl. Later that night, as she lay in bed, Lillian's thoughts swirled in an anxious storm. She was no longer sure of anything, only that something wasn't right. She couldn't explain it, but the unease in her gut had solidified into a cold certainty. After a restless night, she made a decision. She began locking her door at night, something her mother had always told her not to do. Sophia had warned her that locking doors was dangerous, that in case of an emergency, she might not be able to escape quickly. But Lillian's fear drowned out her mother's advice. Each night she would twist the lock, the soft click echoing in the quiet of her room, a small but necessary act of defiance against the creeping unease that Robert's presence had stirred. Lillian never spoke about it to Sophia. She was afraid that her mother wouldn't believe her, that she would think Lillian was simply being dramatic or rebellious. She feared her mother might even blame her for causing trouble, for disturbing the fragile peace they had managed to find after her father's death. So she remained silent, her words trapped behind a wall of uncertainty and fear. But every night, as the lock clicked into place, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was protecting herself from something, someone she couldn't fully name. The anxiety grew, knotting tighter in her chest with every passing day, but still, she kept her secret, hoping that somehow it would all go away on its own. Lillian had kept her fears locked inside for what felt like an eternity, her anxiety festering in silence. But one afternoon, everything changed. As she sat at her desk, her gaze lingering on the page in front of her, she felt the weight of something shifting within her. It was Miss Anne, her literature teacher, who noticed the change first. Lillian had always been a quiet, thoughtful student, but lately she had become withdrawn, distant. Miss Anne observed how Lillian's usually bright eyes were now clouded with uncertainty, how she avoided her classmates and no longer raised her hand in class. Her once lively discussions about books had turned into silent nods or empty stares. That day, Miss Anne pulled her aside after class. She had a soft, patient way about her that made Lillian feel safe, even when her heart was hammering in her chest. The teacher didn't push, but she asked gently if something was bothering her. Lillian's breath caught in her throat. She felt the walls around her thoughts begin to crack. But she was terrified. What if she was wrong? What if telling someone only made things worse? Lillian's mind raced as Miss Anne's eyes remained kind. Waiting, unhurried, she finally spoke, her voice barely more than a whisper. She had never said the words aloud before, but somehow, saying them now felt like a release. "Something's wrong with him," she murmured, her voice trembling. He, he's strange." Her heart beat faster with each passing second, the words feeling heavy and wrong. But there was relief in them too. Miss Anne listened intently, her face serious but filled with understanding. She didn't interrupt or look away. When Lillian finished, Miss Anne nodded slowly, her hand gently resting on the girl's shoulder. She promised that she would help, that Lillian wasn't alone, and that they would find a way to make sure she was safe. But she asked Lillian if she wanted to talk to someone else, someone who could help even more. Despite the fear that gripped her, Lillian nodded, uncertain but desperate for something to change. Miss Anne wasted no time. She calmly called Sophia, explaining that she needed to speak with her about Lillian. Within hours, Sophia arrived at their home. Her face was filled with concern, her eyes wide with confusion and worry. Lillian sat on the couch, her hands clenched in her lap, avoiding her mother's gaze. But Miss Anne's comforting presence gave her the strength she needed. When Sophia asked her what was wrong, Lillian took a deep breath, and for the first time she told the truth. She spoke of the strange way Robert's eyes lingered on her, of the unsettling moments when he was too close, when his touch was too light but left her feeling exposed. She told her mother about the creeping discomfort that had never seemed to go away, and how it had only grown stronger as time went on. Sophia's face drained of color as the words hit her. She had trusted Robert, had invited him into their home, and now her daughter was telling her this. But despite the shock, despite the disbelief that clouded her judgment, Sophia made a choice. She believed Lillian. There was no hesitation in her voice as she wrapped her daughter in a tight embrace, apologizing over and over. She promised that she would do whatever it took to protect her. And for the first time in what felt like a long while, Lillian allowed herself to relax in her mother's arms, knowing that the truth was finally out. Sophia acted swiftly, her resolve hardening as she dialed the police. The call was brief, yet the weight of it hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. Robert was arrested within hours. The authorities moved quickly, gathering evidence and questioning neighbors, revealing that Robert's actions had not been an isolated incident. Other families came forward with similar stories of inappropriate behavior, though Robert continued to deny everything. He maintained his innocence, offering explanations for his actions that sounded rehearsed and hollow, but it was too late. The truth had begun to unravel, and it was only a matter of time before the full extent of his actions came to light. For Lillian, however, the aftermath was a whirlwind of emotions. She felt a heavy mixture of fear and shame that clouded her every thought. She wondered if she had done the right thing, if speaking out had been worth the risk. The quiet voice in her head whispered that she had ruined everything, that she had shattered the fragile stability they had once known. But her mother, always the steadying force, helped her push through the doubts. Sophia never once wavered in her support. She held Lillian close, assuring her that what she had done was brave, that there was nothing to be ashamed of. With each passing day, her words became a little more real to Lillian, helping her shed the weight of guilt she hadn't deserved. In the weeks that followed, Lillian began therapy. It was a slow process. She didn't speak much at first, the pain of her experiences too fresh, the fear still lingering. But over time, she learned to untangle the knot of anxiety in her chest. The therapist, a kind woman named Dr. Thompson, helped her understand the depth of her trauma and guided her as she worked through the overwhelming feelings of shame. Dr. Thompson showed Lillian how to rebuild her sense of safety, helping her find strength in the act of speaking, of sharing her story. With each session, Lillian felt more confident, more whole. She began to understand that her voice mattered, that it was not a weakness, but a source of power. As Lillian's recovery progressed, Sophia made a conscious effort to spend more time with her. They took walks in the park, shared quiet afternoons at home, and had long talks about everything and nothing. Sophia promised Lillian that she would never again let her feel alone, that she would always be there no matter what. And it was a promise she kept. Her presence a constant reassurance that they were in this together, that they could face anything as long as they had each other. Returning to school was one of the hardest things Lillian had ever done. The halls felt different, the eyes of her classmates heavy with unspoken questions. But her friends rallied around her, offering quiet support. They didn't ask for details, didn't pry, but their kindness was enough to help Lillian feel safe again. She no longer hid her pain, no longer buried her feelings behind a mask of silence. She spoke openly when she felt ready, no longer afraid of her own vulnerability. She had faced the truth, and in doing so had found a new strength, a strength that allowed her to walk through the world with her head held high, knowing that she was not defined by what had happened to her, but by the courage she had shown in overcoming it. In the months that followed, Lillian began to find her purpose. What had once been a source of fear became the catalyst for her growth. With the support of her mother, Sophia, in the therapy she had worked so hard to embrace, Lillian transformed the pain of her past into a drive to help others. She realized that her story could be more than just her own. It could be a lifeline for others who were still struggling in silence. At school, Lillian started a support group for kids who had experienced trauma. She called it Voices Together, a space where young people could come together, share their experiences, or simply sit in silence if that was what they needed. It was a safe place where no one had to feel alone in their pain. Lillian spoke at the first meeting, her voice steady, though her heart still carried a weight. She spoke about the importance of having someone listen, about the power of simply being heard. For the first time, she didn't feel afraid of her own voice. In her journal, Lillian wrote, "My voice is my salvation now. I'm not afraid to speak." Each word felt like a step away from the darkness. Each sentence a declaration of strength. She had spent so long silencing herself, afraid of what might happen if she spoke. Now she embraced her words with courage and conviction, knowing that they held power. Sophia stood by her daughter every step of the way, her love and support unwavering. Together, they worked on projects that would help children who had experienced abuse find the help they needed. Sophia encouraged Lillian to keep pushing, to keep talking, to keep making a difference. Their bond grew stronger with each passing day, and Lillian began to realize that the love and support she had now could help heal wounds that had once seemed too deep to touch. One morning, as the sun began to rise, casting a soft glow across the sky, Lillian sat by the window in her room. She watched as the light slowly broke through the darkness, painting the world with the promise of a new day. It was a symbol of the hope that had been rekindled inside her. The future no longer seemed as uncertain and frightening. There were still challenges ahead, but now Lillian felt ready. She had found her voice, and with it, she would help others find theirs too. As the morning sun bathed her in warmth, Lillian smiled, knowing that every new day brought with it a chance for healing, for change, and for a brighter future.